Hello there and welcome back to the AgostinhoZinga show with me, your host, AgostinhoZinga, and this is episode number 442. Should be 442. If it's not 442, then I apologize, but I'm pretty sure it's 442. How you doing? How you feeling? Great, amazing. How am I? Doing the best I can with the time that is available. Actually, in a far better mood and place now at the moment, especially with things slightly but surely opening up. The sun is starting to shine, people are starting to percolate outdoors, and certain parts of our sector, industry, whatever it may be, are slowly starting to open up. So fingers crossed, all should go to plan and we should be back where we need to be by the summer. But anyway, before we continue with the show, if it's your first time checking out the show via YouTube, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. That'd be more than appreciated. If you're listening via the podcasting apps, a 5-star review will be greatly appreciated too, to help with the algorithms. And of course, if you want to sign up to the Patreon to get 2 bonus shows on Patreon, only exclusive to my Patreon members, and make sure you jump on board there. I would love to see you. But yeah, how's it going, man? How is it going? Going pretty well on my end. Like, as I mentioned, stuff's starting to open up. Things are starting to get back to some semblance of normality, which is great for all involved. I think everyone's kind of basically had enough and are ready and willing to go back outdoors. Some people are even dying and crying and eager to run back into the office, which is a real sign of how bleak things have got in the last few weeks, having to deal with this bloody virus, right? People are desperate to get back in the office. And think back to August of last year. You wouldn't have, there was not a chance you would have got people queuing up to go back into a co-working space or an office building, right? People are more than happy to stay at home. But as the sun starts to shine and starts to get a bit warm and people are outdoors, it's one thing working from home when it's the winter time, but it's another thing having to work from home when it's summer, especially all week. I think people are probably going to do what I think a lot of my friends have basically done, which is split their time and kind of commit to doing maybe 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or vice versa. But the idea of spending an entire week, months on month, year on year, just indoors, just doing work, especially with the way our summers have been the last few years, which have been pretty great, it's not really ideal. So I'm definitely sure, especially now with spending time indoors, you want to just see people, you want to be around other humans. So that should be a little bit of a weird turn up for the books, because I don't think anyone would have really anticipated that prior. A lot of companies are, remember, there's a lot of companies coming out saying, oh, hey man, we are pushing for working from home stuff, right? We're doing this change, we're doing this, we're doing that. Everyone was trying to, basically comfort and alleviate some fears from prospective employees and employees that are already working at their company. And now we've suddenly shifted back to this weird idea that things will maybe just get back to normal a lot quicker than people would have really anticipated, which shouldn't be that much a surprise. We're humans, and humans are very adaptable. But when things are presented that are kind of the easy way out of things, we are kind of also creatures of the path of least resistance, right? And if something is an easy option and it brings us the most joy in life, then we're just going to take that option. So I think I wouldn't be surprised as well if people just go back to how they were prior, snap right back into shape, do exactly what they did prior, and just continue on with that. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Of course, in the same extent, it wouldn't surprise me if habits have changed completely. But I think if by now you haven't moved away, if by now you haven't made any big real career changes, it's unlikely that suddenly you're going to do it when the world reopens. You're probably, you're probably not going to do that. It's unlikely that you're probably still making fucking sourdough bread now, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's the same sort of example. So I think people have probably moved on from that whole malarkey and just want to get back to some semblance of normality, because at the end of the day, if we don't have normality, what else do we have? What else has been going on? Over the weekend? Of course, UFC 260. I'll talk about that later. Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic, number 2. Great card. There's been loads of festivals and raves that have been selling out in record time, which has been great to see again. As a fan myself, it's great to see the appetite is still there, which is no surprise really when you consider all the playgraves that happened during the summer of last year and even towards the end of last year. People are just desperate to go out and gather and stuff, and I've got some other bits and clips that I'll probably atone to that. So that's great to see. International football, don't give a fuck, have completely skipped it. It's a weird thing to do, isn't it? That's when like the amount of money that's involved with sponsors and stuff, and it's effectively how footballers are treated, especially professional athletes, right? They're just told to go out and dribble, right? We don't care what the conditions are. We could be at war. You have to play football. But it really does seem a bit counterproductive to have international football be played during a time when we're kind of, battling a global pandemic. It doesn't make any sense, does it really? I get a lot of players or a lot of teams aren't really traveling too far, and they've obviously got, they're obviously abiding by all the protocols necessary. They have all the top, level doctors and whatever looking after them. They have money to burn, so they're going to be fine, right? It's not as if they're regular scrubs like you or I, but it just seems like an odd thing to do timing wise, to decide, hey, we're going to go and play international football with all these variables, with all the people that are associated with teams and national federations and all this malarkey, so many employees that travel around with them, for what? Right, it doesn't make any sense. It really is a bit odd, the timing of it, especially when you consider, I think they announced the other day that the new season's going to start in August, right? So they're going to snap right back into it. So it's going to end in like June, July. The players will get like a month off, if that, and then they go straight back into playing Premier League football the next season, starting from August. It's a hell of a schedule, isn't it? Really, really is a hell of a schedule. So as much as people like to go on about how much money they're paying, all this malarkey, just imagine if you're pretty much, I won't say risk averse, but just imagine if you're just family orientated, you've just had a new kid, you've just gotten married, and you're spending, the entire week playing 2 games a week, training all the time, then you're traveling abroad to play international football, then you're right back into it again in August. It just could get really, really dicey really, really quickly, especially in a country like this, the one I live in currently, which is not the most, I want to say, understanding when it comes to the plight of the rich and famous, let's say, right? We tend to kind of, turn our nose up at it and say, I wish I had those kind of problems. So it can get a bit weird very, very quickly. But what else happened? But before we continue on to that, we just want to quickly dedicate a little bit of time to Claude from Arsenal Fan TV, who unfortunately passed away sometime, was it today or yesterday? The news kind of broke all across Twitter, and everyone's kind of been paying tribute to the guy, which is great to see. I think most people will be familiar with Claude from his time at Arsenal Fan TV, formerly AFTV, for Arsenal Fan TV, now known as AFTV, an integral part of the original crew of people that made that channel what it is, an integral part, I'm going to say, in just the history of fan channels, right, and fan reactions, because for the longest time, before even AFTV came along, there was this idea, especially in the UK, maybe it's different in other countries, but there was this kind of weird thing where there was a hierarchy in terms of opinions when it comes to sports, right? A lot of it had to kind of, it was sort of like top down. So if you were a former pro, you kind of got given the platform to say and do whatever you wanted, but then if you were a journalist, you maybe came second and whatever, and then after that it kind of trickled down. But usually the voice of the fans wasn't really heard, no one really gave a crap. And then the moment Robbie set up Arsenal Fan TV, and then got those cast of very colourful supporters who had very different views about how they saw the direction Arsenal were going in, the performances on the pitch, it really kind of shined a light on one kind of portion of the fan base, but also gave them a voice. Because the good thing about football, in my opinion, especially with the era of politics that we're living in at the moment, it sort of lets you know where you stand or where you sit in your kind of like influence. Because I think with politics, for some reason, you kind of get the idea that you can kind of affect change by shouting a lot, by hashtagging, by protesting in the streets, but really and truly nothing really changes, right? You get given the illusion of democracy, but it doesn't necessarily exist. The people in power can just do what they want at the end of the day with little to no reprise. And the same thing happens in football, but it's a bit more clear, right? It's a bit more obvious, and you get to kind of just absorb it and just kind of understand that, hey, I love my team more than whoever owns it and whoever's in charge. I'm just going to support them for thick and thin. And it kind of, I don't know what it does to you. It kind of makes you, I wouldn't say mature, but it sort of just allowed you to kind of be a little bit, I won't say disconnected, but you can be invested in it passionately and be very emotionally attached to it, but you can also understand that there's only so far, like there's only so much you can do as one fan. And just having the ability and a platform to kind of vent your displeasure is enough already, right? That kind of gives you a chance to release, and that's what you need. Whereas I think sometimes with these people that are like, obsessed with politics, they get to shout into the void, and they just keep thinking, they keep shouting things are going to change. But at least with fans, we know it's not going to change, but at least we have a platform to do so. So obviously with the fan channels, I think they've served a great purpose in that regard. They've really, I think, alleviated a lot of people's stress and angst, especially people that are watching from home and don't get a chance to go to stadiums. You get a chance to vent, share your opinions. Even if you're not on the show, you can leave comments comments on YouTube and stuff. It's just a nice way to like kind of for fans to express their love and their passion for their club. But of course, on the other side, it can get toxic. It can get a little bit, weird, especially on Twitter, those kind of places where people can, build up narratives and agendas against people. It can also be used as a platform for people to be faceless and criticize you, even though you're putting your face out there. The people that are criticizing you aren't necessarily. So it's a bit of like a one-way sort of attack platform in that regard, right? There's not really much you can do to kind of win, quote unquote, on places like Twitter, but people can kind of attack you and sort of drive this narrative, drag your name in the mud, and kind of bully you in a way, which is not really the greatest thing to kind of go through. I would imagine, especially when you've got like 100 and thousands of people coming and in your mentions, directing to hate towards you every time Arsenal lose, just can just be annoying. But again, like I said, Claude was one of my faves. Definitely somebody who I kind of thought was a good representative of Arsenal fans. He kind of had a good balance of being very knee-jerk and reactionary, very level-headed, very passionate, very delusional, everything like a real fan of a team is, right? Encapsulated into one person. Of course, he had his issues. That's kind of been, spoken about. It's probably not the time to say it. Kind of want to celebrate his life more so. Just play a couple clips. And of course, unfortunately, his time at AFTV came to an end, due to some unsavory things he said during a match thing, which again I thought wasn't really handled the best at the time. But water under the bridge, I'm sure they were able to kind of reconcile that things behind the scenes. But it's just great that in an era where a lot of people, fans, customers in general, you can be a bit voiceless, that these platforms do exist in general. And I think even though when AFTV first came around, most football fans, myself included, were kind of thumbing our nose at it and scoffing at it, thinking, oh, these fans are so cringe, these fans are so cringe. But then eventually, when every single club in the country started to have their own fan channels, we started to recognize everyone has a portion of their fans that are similar to the Arsenal fan TVs, right? They exist in every single fan base, and that's what keeps fan bases interesting. That's what makes supporting a club interesting, right? Why support a club if you can't be delusional? There's no real point in that regard. You must just be a general fan of football in general. So yeah, big up Claude again. Thoughts and prayers go out to everyone associated with him and his family. And I'll just play a couple of clips here that I found on your Twitter space of some of his highlights. This is courtesy of a guy called Papa Pinkus. It says, listen to this short speech from Claude made to Robbie during AFTV's 5th anniversary. What an effing man, in a much better place with his mum now. Let's play the video.
2012, this guy gave me a chance to speak. Yeah, no one else would. All the snobby podcasters won't have me on. But this guy gave me a chance to speak, and I'm very grateful for you, and you deserve every success that you've made of it, right? You helped me when I was down and was really on my low. You came and saved me. You came and saved me when I was on real low, and I really appreciate that. You are not only, you are my mate, you're like a brother to me, mate, and I love you. 2012.
What a legend. And then another one. Says here, this was always made my favourite Claude interview from AFTV. Just perfect encapsulated what an absolute gentleman he was and what also meant. Rest easy. Let's play this one.
He worked his socks off. I know. And he delivered my cup final ticket, and I'm really proud of him for that. No, listen, no. I'm so happy because... No, I'm so happy. But also because there's people that are no longer with us, like Martin, Josie, all these people, all Arsenal fans that have left, that departed, that up there. I'm happy for them because they're not here to see it, but they would have been proud to say we've actually broken that 9-year stint, and I'm delighted for these fucking fans who are the most patient fans in the world, by the way, the most patient fans in the world, the best fans in the world, they're fucking brilliant fans. I'm so fucking proud of you all. They kept at it, and we've 9 years, we've waited for this trophy. 49 undefeated. 49, 49, I say. 49, undefeated. They would do all the Arsenal way. Listen. No, we've got to go on now. This is just the start. We've got to go on. I want some money spent in the summer. All right, nice, decent striker. Let's take this on another level because this is a massive club.
Another one. And then, of course, his iconic catchphrase here at the end, just to kind of cap it all off. Please lower your volume if you're listening to this via headphones.
It's time to go! That's all I was going to ask you.
But yeah, R.I.P. Robbie. I mean, R.I.P. Robbie. So God forbid that touch with R.I.P. Claude. Hope his family and stuff are being well looked after and all that malarkey during this tough time. We move on. What else we got? Oh yes, we have the madness of crowds, or so it may seem, across parts of the UK, with parks open and people being able to join in groups. You know what? The knocks come out, the phones come out, the people complaining on social come out, and it's all just an absolute mess, isn't it? Oh, it's an absolute mess. So this is courtesy of BBC News. This says COVID madness as hundreds descend on Nottingham Park. Police have warned people to stick to coronavirus rules after large crowds were seen brawling and drinking in the city park on the day restrictions are eased. Video shared on social media shows some hugging, others pushing and shoving at Nottingham Arboretum. One local resident described the scenes on Monday as horrendous. Police said that they now put dispersal order in place to prevent similar scenes over the next few days. Since Monday morning, 2 households of groups of up to 6 people have been allowed to meet outside in England. Now, this really shouldn't be an issue, right? This really shouldn't be a surprise. People have been essentially imprisoned in their homes for the best part of a year due to a virus that affects 99.9%, what, 99.99 or let's say 90% of the population, doesn't matter what it is. Supposedly I read this other statistic, which I'm not sure if it's true, but allegedly up to 80% of people who passed away or badly affected from COVID were obese or majorly overweight or something along those kind of lines. Who knows if that's true? But regardless, there's obviously, especially now that we have some time to look at things, especially as we've had a chance to compare and contrast notes with places that have done stuff well when it comes to lockdown, like New Zealand, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia, it basically come to the conclusion that maybe in the long term, lockdown wasn't a right strategy for us living in the Western Hemisphere, right? It just didn't necessarily work or vibe with us as people. We just kind of got restless. Our cities were too interconnected. People just absconded from the rules, regardless of what the situation is, regardless. So it's no surprise, in my opinion, usually in places like Nottingham, big university town, many young people, that they would want to just go and live life and just basically say, you know what, this virus isn't going to affect me the way it might affect other people. We're at a point now of vaccinations where we're kind of at a point where things can be opened up a little bit quicker than what they're meant to be opened up in a roadmap, and people are going to wild out a little bit. Now, am I happy about seeing litter all over parks and stuff? Probably not. It's one of my pet peeves in general in the UK. We tend to have that a lot. People tend to kind of enjoy going to parks and going outdoors, but they tend not to take any responsibility for their surroundings whatsoever. People just tend to just leave stuff lying around, which then drives the local population to get complaints, and then that goes to the council, and then inevitably leads to situations where parks are closed very early, or they prevent you from congregating in certain sections. It just gets a bit annoying. So we basically, don't only have ourselves to blame for some of the restrictions that get put in place in some parts of the UK. But this should be no surprise that young people would want to go and hang out with each other after being locked indoors for the best part of a year. This should come as no surprise, and it will probably get quote unquote worse as the season starts to get, as it starts to get warmer weather-wise, and the restrictions start to get loosened bit by bit by bit. Of course, you would hope people would be a little bit more well-behaved, quote unquote, but I'm not really against it in any way, shape, or form. So let's play a little bit of the clip here and see what they deem to be a brawl. This is from the BBC. It looks like a celebration or some sort of mosh pit to me. In my regard, I don't think that's a fight, because usually people try to get away from people actually swinging violently at each other, but I could be wrong.
That's how it's meant to be. As long as everyone's following the rules of COVID, it feels alright. Everyone's feeling happy again, and that's what's important.
You feel good, you see people around, you see friends that you know.
It feels alright. Everyone's feeling happy again, and that's what...
That's a legend, the right guy here. He's got his t-shirt over his mouth and he's talking to the cameraman. It's absolutely hilarious.
It's important.
Feel good. You see people around, you see friends that you know, and you're like, my guy, my guy, my guy.
Oops. Let's continue here. Hopefully it's going to load. What's happening here?
My guy, my guy.
How you been?
There you go. Just a bunch of young people hanging out in the park enjoying themselves. And you know what's actually interesting about this video? Seeing these kids all hanging around in the park and stuff and, you know, having a whale of a time. We didn't necessarily have this sort of thing prior. So this might be one of those weird net positives of COVID, where we come out of this lockdown where people start to maybe interact with their local surroundings a little bit more and start to enjoy things outside of just hanging out in pubs and bars. I know prior to lockdown, there's a lot of conversation among my group of friends, social group and stuff, where people were kind of, you know, maybe pulling away from the party scene and didn't really want to get on it all the time, but they also went to hang out with their friends. So they're all stuck in this weird conundrum. If I want to hang out with my friends, I have to get on it or get drunk, but I don't want to, but that's the only way I can see them. So there was no real place to go and hang out, or you didn't really see like there was a place that you could go and just chill with your friends, have a chat. Whereas if you go to parts of continental Europe, you go to, you know, parts of the other, even parts of the world, wherever it may be, you see many, many people in the city centres, parks, whatever, just sitting and just kind of people watching, hanging out, maybe grabbing a coffee, having a drink, catch up with their friend, a little walk and talk. It's just a common occurrence. But for some reason, for a long period of time in the UK, the only social thing to do was to consume alcohol or get high in some regard. It didn't really exist to just hang out, especially the younger generation, because I know I went through it as myself as well, you know, having grown up and going out in the party scene here in East London, you know, all of it kind of centered around alcohol or drugs. That was it. Nothing else kind of existed. So if you kind of grow out of that and you want to move on, but you still want to hang out with those same people, it can get a bit difficult to make that work. So this might be a net positive going forward, where people might just be a little bit like, you know what, even when other stuff opens up, that should be an option. You can still go to a bar in a club and hang out or a gallery, but you still have the option to just enjoy your local parks, enjoy local canals, enjoy a walk and talk, whatever it may be, and just kind of embrace that whole side of living in the UK that doesn't necessarily get utilized as much as it should do. Don't get me wrong, maybe it might be different outside London, but I know in London people do kind of underuse our public spaces and public parks that we have to a real great degree. I know in the area that I live in, the only people that really hang out in parks and stuff and actually enjoy the local surroundings are usually immigrants that have come here newly, right? They don't really, you know, abide by our social cues, so you'll see them sitting on curbs, on benches around the place and just hanging out and chatting. Whereas us, we tend to always try to go to places where we have to pay an entry fee, hang out in a pub somewhere. So this kind of mixes up a little bit, and I'm happy to see it personally going forward. But of course, you know, we live in this weird narc hall monitor society where everyone wants to sort of kind of dictate how other people interact and enjoy, you know, how people kind of live their lives, which is always kind of perplexed me. But I guess in this regard, there is no hill to stand on, because this is all, you know, allowed via the rules that have been put out there. And, you know, especially with vaccinations going up and up and up and the numbers of deaths falling, this is only going to get better, I think, as things progress. But for some people, it might get worse. We continue here with the article. It says here, footage appeared to show multiple instances of social distancing being ignored as large numbers of people began gathering from the afternoon and stayed into the evening. One video showed people pushing and shoving each other, and a large amount of litter was left behind. Like I said, the pushing and shoving looked more like a rave or more like a mosh pit, or people just having a bit of fun and just, you know, letting out some angst and generally just hugging people. You know what I mean? Like, what's the last time you actually hugged a stranger, right? Like, it feels nice sometimes when you're out and you connect with somebody, you want to share a little hug. So this is what people are doing. Quote here: last night it was horrendous seeing what we saw on what's going on, said the resident told BBC Radio Nottingham. I walked past the way to a shop and it was just madness. It seems like the real joke when people are still struggling. Staying late, leaving all the rubbish, every single element of this is completely selfish. A mature student, Tom Scott, said, who was in the auditorium when Monday evening, said it felt utterly disrespectful. There were probably 800 to 1,200 people. When they got kicked out, everyone left their rubbish at the site. Pat Robinson, the Arboretum Resident Association, said the main culprits were students. He said, we were living in a student campus and they treat the area appallingly. I saw many drunken students climbing all over the railings of the Arboretum, screaming and shouting. There were still signs saying no to alcohol, but none of them were enforcing it. But I guess that's just the unfortunate existence that kind of you have to go through when you live in a university town. I guess if you own a local business, you have the luxury or the perk or the ability to kind of gain some more money. You kind of have a refreshing busload of new students coming in every year. They probably prop up your business and allow you to go on your fancy holidays. But of course, when it gets bad, it gets really bad. Because I remember when I was that age, you know, you don't give a crap about your local, you don't give a crap about anywhere you happen to kind of be around. You don't really care about your local community. You're not engaged in that respect, in that regard, and you just kind of follow the crowd. So that can definitely lead to some unfortunate circumstances. It continues here. University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University has been both approached for comment. Nottingham City Council leader David Mallon said he was working with the partners of the Nottingham University because we think it's a good number of people there on Monday were students. You can see a picture here of the narcs feds telling kids to open their bags. They're leaving a public park, which is insane, to be honest, right? I'm not doing that. I'm walking straight past you, especially if you're like a community support officer, but you know, people get scared. It continued. Monday was the first day that people had to go meet and hang out. To see that exploited and people behaving in such a way, unruly fashion, is just so disappointing. As a result of the scenes on Monday, officers were seen stopping people at the auditorium gates, checking their bags for alcohol, which is prohibited under the Public Spaces Protection Act, which is insane. The most recent figures showed Nottingham had a coronavirus cases of 72%. No, 72.7 per 100,000 people in the week up to 26th of March, higher than the national average of 54.7, which is of course a bit of a red flag. But again, if it's a majority university town and there's a lot of young kids in there, they could argue the fact that it's less likely to affect them than it is to affect the older population. Again, you get into the whole conversation about you should stay home because you're going to kill people, blah, 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 blah. Who really cares? Continue for a period of October. The city also had its highest infection rate in the UK. Earlier this month, Nottingham police brought in a dispersal orders in Lenton and the Arboretum to prevent further flouting of lockdown rules after reports of antisocial and house parties. Now, my main gripe usually is of rubbish. Like I mentioned prior, this is just a problem that exists in the entirety of the UK. You go to many parks across the summer, especially over the weekend, you see bare people just, you know, sitting in little groups, buying drinks, hanging out, you know, disposable barbecues and stuff, you know, having a whale of a time. And the moment they decide to leave to bounce to some other location, they just leave all that stuff behind. I've never understood it because, don't get me wrong, it's not as if bins are like readily available in a lot of parks. Some of them are overflowing, some of them are a bit far to get to, far quote unquote, but you know what I mean. They're not all over the place, they're not that readily available, and it kind of makes people, it gives the people the excuse to adopt bad habits, right? But there is just a common decency thing that everyone should do, regardless of just protecting and kind of looking after your own space. Because the moment you look after your little circle, it kind of rubs off on other people, right? If you see one person, one group of people getting up and picking up all their rubbish, it inevitably is going to lead one other group to do it too. And it's a kind of knock-on effect, as opposed to just chastising everybody, as opposed to banning everyone from going. It just doesn't necessarily get to the root of the issue. But again, I just wish people would take more personal responsibility for this thing, because I think as boring and as kind of narky and as whole monetary as a country we can be sometimes, I do think we kind of, you know, we do this to ourselves. Yeah, we kind of fuck things up for ourselves, and when stuff gets banned, when you get prevented from doing certain things, people then cry and get upset. But you can't really complain if they decide to close the park and not let you go in there without ID or without bringing alcohol into the park, when you're just leaving it in this kind of state of disarray. Do you know what I mean? You kind of have to have respect for your spaces and your community and where you kind of go around. I don't know, I just never really understood it. It's sort of like people who it's a no-no in a graffiti scene, but there's some people that do it it, who they live in a particular area, and they start tagging up people's local businesses or their homes and stuff. It's like, what are you doing? If you're gonna go tag up places, go to another area, right, and go and, you know, muddy up their scenery and stuff, but don't go and destroy your own little community. It doesn't make any sense, really, and it's only going to lead to more trouble, more hassle, bloody blah blah blah. So that's the only thing I'd say towards it. But again, I don't know. I just think, you know, young kids, especially people that have been in university, they've suffered greatly during COVID lockdowns. They've been really abandoned, I think, for the most part, right? There's been obviously a lot of emphasis placed towards kids that are like younger, I guess under 16, which makes sense, but they've really been forgotten about, right? This entire time when you're about to go to your first year of uni, or you're going into your second or third or fourth, whatever year you're doing, you're planning out your future, you've got internships planned, work experience stuff doing, and then suddenly this thing just takes it all out of the way, and then you're now having to do the same classes that you're probably overpaying for in tuition fees on Zoom in your dorm room with a lecturer that couldn't give a fuck about what you're doing on your future, and then you're prevented from going outdoors and meeting up with your friends. It's just an entirely messed up situation for everyone involved, and I'm not surprised people are acting out. That's basically my premise of this. I'm not surprised people are acting out, but again, you know, people like to get shocked about the most mundane things these days in the world. So what can you do? And then we're going to move off that one, and I think this is a really great segue into this pretty abhorrent and also not that surprising article from Bloomberg that sort of touches upon a lot of this stuff that I'm just struggling to really understand in the wake of everything that's been going on. So this is courtesy of Bloomberg. It says, we must start planning for a permanent pandemic. The subtitle says, with coronavirus mutations pitted against vaccinations in global arms race, we may never go back to normal. Like, written by Andreas Kloof. And the first thing that comes to mind is, what's wrong with these journalists, right? What is up with these journalists who are just obsessed and committed to writing up the most doom-laden articles that they can muster in the wake of, you know, things maybe going back to normal in some reasonable time frame? Why are they so hell-bent on making sure that they currently keep reminding us that things could get worse before they get better at every single turn, despite every medical advancement, right? Despite the fact that we've even got a vaccine in the first place, which is, again, a marvel of medicine, that we've been able to kind of run it through, speed it through the process, maybe not jumped over some hoops in terms of regulation, but we've been able to kind of develop it, produce it, right, put it into circulation at this level in order to get the world back functioning as it should be. And people are still hell-bent on reminding you that no, not so fast. You should still be at home. Things should still be locked down. Like, what is it? And the only thing that I can come away thinking from it is that some of these people just genuinely do enjoy living in this state of misery. They've kind of, no, I wouldn't say, they kind of got some comfort from it. And it's macabre to say this, but it definitely does ring true when you think of that quote from, was it Walden? Yeah, Henry David Thoreau, right? Most men live lives of quiet desperation. This definitely kind of speaks to it, where there is some comfort in the idea that everybody is suffering the same as you are, or to the same extent. We're all kind of going through this collective situation where, regardless of how rich you may be or access you do have, you're not living life to the extent that you're living it in 2019. You're still living it with some limits, right? With some limits to your freedom and your movement, whatever it may be. You're not kind of living life to the level that you were living it, which then again kind of illustrates your level of access, wealth, malarkey, blah, 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 blah. So this is kind of the great equalizer in some respects, right? Because we're all going through it at the same time, in real time, obviously to varying levels, but it's essentially affecting everybody the same sort of way, in a way, right? Generally. So maybe it kind of brings people like Andreas Kloof some level of relief that this is happening, because generally their lives day to day are miserable. So when everyone else is miserable, it makes them happy. Maybe that's it. Or maybe they're just generally scared about going back into the real world, which again makes you think, so why should, if just because you're scared, why should you have the right to make me scared when I don't want to be? And why is there this constant need to just write up these pieces where it's like, if you try to be optimistic and try to look at the world a bit more, glass half full, and try to think of all the things that could change for the better and all the great things to look forward to when we get back into living our normal lives, you'll be met with some level of resistance that you're being a COVID denier or you're anti-vax or something. It's just such a bizarre place that we're in at the moment. So let's read a bit of the article and we continue. It says here, For the past year, an assumption, sometimes explicit, often tacit, has informed almost all our thinking about the pandemic. At some point, it will be over and then we'll go back to quote unquote back to normal. This premise is almost certainly wrong. SARS-CoV-2, protein and elusive as it is, may become the permanent enemy like the flu, but worse. And even if it petters out eventually, our lives and routines will by then change irreversibly. Going quote unquote back to normal won't be an option. The only way is forward, but to what exactly? Just like, what is that? Like, what relief and what kind of hope is that meant to bring to anybody? But hey, we continue. Most epidemics disappear once a population achieve herd immunity and the pathogen has few or vulnerable bodies available to host it for its self-propagation. This herd protection comes about through the combination of natural immunity in people who have recovered from infection with vaccinations of the remaining population. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, however, recent developments suggest that we may never achieve herd immunity, even in the US, which leads most other countries in vaccinations and already had one large outbreak, won't get there. That's the upshot of the analysis by Christopher Murray of the University of Washington and Peter Piot of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. The main reason is the ongoing emergence of the new variants that behave almost like new viruses, and the clinical vaccine trial in South Africa showed that people in the placebo group had to previously be infected with the one strain, had no immunity against the mutated descendant, and became reinfected. There are similar reports from parts of Brazil that had massive outbreaks and subsequently suffered renewed epidemics. We knew this was going to be the case, though. No one was under the assumption that just because everyone got vaccinated, there wasn't going to be mutations of the virus. But we're willing to take the risk. As with all things in life, there's going to be some risk involved with just deciding to open things up again once we achieve some level of immunization. So the argument against that would just be like, what? We have to wait for everything to currently disappear until it goes back to normal. Economies couldn't survive. This person's job couldn't survive. But then maybe that's the case. Maybe these journalists are so kind of insulated from the consequences of living in the real world, right? Because essentially, to be a journalist, especially nowadays, you don't really need to have, you don't need to be in one permanent location. You're essentially just doing it all from the comfort of your laptop or PC. You can do it remotely anywhere in the world. You can write for a number of publications all at the same time. Especially with platforms like Substack and stuff, it kind of takes you out of the need to kind of be, in the rat race, competing for bylines and editorials and columns and stuff, whatever it may be. But you'd assume with some of that level of maneuverability, flexibility, and options to kind of do what you want with your career, that they'd be a little bit more hopeful about the future. But no, instead, in their ivory towers, sipping on expensive coffee and eating, avocado on toast and sourdough bread or something, they're chastising us for the need for our desire to return back to quote unquote normal, when we have no option really, right? In a world where regular working class people have no other option but to return to normal because that's the only way they're going to put food on the table, they're telling you that no, you shouldn't go back outdoors because there's these mutant variations of the virus that are kind of developing out there in the urethra that we should be afraid of. It continues. That leaves only vaccinations as a path towards herd immunity. And admittedly, some of the shots available today are still somewhat effective against some of the new variants, but over time they will become powerless against the other coming mutations. Of course, vaccine makers are already feverishly working on making new jabs, in particular inoculations based on the revolutionary mRNA technology I previously described, can be updated faster than any vaccine history, but the serum still needs to be made, shipped, distributed, and jabbed. And the process hasn't happened fast enough, nor covered the planet widely enough. Yes, some of us may win in a regional round or two against a virus by vaccinating one particular population, as Israel has done, for instance, but evolution doesn't care where it does its work, and the virus replicates whenever it finds warm, unvaccinated bodies with cells that let it reproduce its RNA. As it copies itself, it makes occasional coding mistakes, and some of the chances errors turn into other mutations. The viral avatars are popping up whenever there's a lot of transmission going on and somebody bothers to look closely. a British, a South African, and at least one Brazilian strain that are already become notorious. But I've also seen reports of viral cousins and nephews showing up in California, Oregon, and elsewhere. If we were to sequence samples in more places, we'd probably find more relatives. Again, more scaremongering. It continues, we should therefore assume that the virus is already mutating fast in many poor countries that have so far received no jabs at all, even if their youthful populations keep mortality manageable, thus masking the severity of the local outbreaks. Last month, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of United Nations, reminded the world that 75% of all shots had been administered to just 10 countries, while 130 countries hadn't primed a single syringe. Again, this is stuff that's way beyond most of our pay grades, way beyond most of our political jurisdiction, things that are affecting people in poor parts of the world, third world countries that are inherently corrupt, riddled with all sorts of controversies day to day, right, that we have absolutely no knowledge of or influence on. So again, I don't see what the point is of that, but we continue. A pathogen's evolution is neither surprising nor automatically worrisome. One frequent pattern is that bugs over time become more contagious but less virulent. After all, not killing your host too efficiently confirms an advantage in natural selection. If SARS-CoV-2 goes this route, it will eventually become just another common cold. But that's not what has been done recently. The variants we know have become more infectious but not less lethal. From the epidemiological point of view, what's the worst news? That's the worst news. So again, a very macabre and somber, negative way to sort of look at things, which is kind of understandable considering it's coming from a journalist who isn't going to be affected by the lockdown in any way, shape or form. Their future or their lifestyles are probably going to remain the same, and they have the luxury of doing so. Most people, average people like me and you, have to kind of interact and get back to living a quasi-normal life. And I just think in general, with things improving with vaccinations and stuff, and rates going down, especially with deaths, there is some optimism to kind of highlight and to remind people about, to kind of give them some level of hope. Because I think, I don't know, it depends who's reading these things. If it's just the average consumer, if it's just people within the sort of media world, then it doesn't matter. But if you're writing this sort of thing in effort to reach general average everyday people, then I would think that there's some responsibility to provide them with some good news, with some morsel of optimism to look forward to, especially considering how bleak things were last year. You want to provide them with some level of hope, right, that things will get better sooner rather than later, instead of kind of reminding them of how bleak the situation is and how badly it could turn at a moment's notice, because we're all aware of that, but we just choose not to kind of constantly live our lives reminding ourselves of the fact that we're going to die at any moment in time. I think that we're all kind of aware of our mortality. We're all aware of how insignificant we are in the grand scheme of things, but we try to do the best with the time that we have available to make the most of the little time that we do have available on this planet. Constantly be reminded that of our mortality just isn't helpful in any way, shape or form, especially considering that we've been pummeled, especially in parts of Western Europe with COVID. Parts of our governments have dealt with it catastrophically badly, right? It would be nice just to have the media, the mainstream media especially, use this opportunity to maybe, call to account the politicians and also provide some good news and some hope for people that are watching it, regular citizens like you and I. But, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I'm asking for too much. All right, we move on from that one. What else do we have to crack on here with? As a little it's a little primer just to kind of mix things up a little bit. This is courtesy of Best Football Instagram account, and this is a interesting video. This is a video here we got of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Alexander Lacazette, I guess it looks like, in the Arsenal changing room, and essentially Alexander Lacazette is teasing Aubameyang about his hairstyle that essentially makes him look like Travis Scott, and he's kind of enjoying the banter. It's kind of a good little look into changing room, football changing room lifestyle and how that must be. But it's also interesting just from like a perspective of somebody like myself who kind of goes out of his way not to have anything that can be related or similar to somebody famous. It's something that I've kind of constantly fought against, right? The moment somebody famous wears something that you've kind of been doing yourself, inadvertently you're going to be called, oh, you've got the Ferro glasses, oh, you've got the ASAP Rocky trousers, or whatever it may be. It's a constant thing you kind of have to live with. And unfortunately, especially when you're black, I'd say, right, you have a very limited palette, a very limited choice of styles of hair that you can kind of use. So the last thing you want to do is adopt a hairstyle of somebody you've seen work in public, even though you know it works, right? It's very tempting. You know it works, but you also know that the moment you wear it, everyone's going to assume that you're doing it because of that person, when sometimes you're just doing it because you like it, because it suits your head, or just because you just want to, I don't know, whatever. There's many reasons, but I just don't like the ambiguity of it. The ambiguity just annoys me, right? And that's what gets on my nerves. So let's play a little bit of the video so you can hear what they're talking about. But the ambiguity of itself just gets on my nerves too badly that I would never want to put myself in a situation at all. But some guys just do like it. They don't mind having stuff similar to people that are well known in public, you know, public figures and stuff, but not for me. Let's play a little bit of it now.
Some noise, Travis Scott is in the fucking building. Yeah! Show to the gram, show to the gram. Show to the gram, woo, sexy boy. Show to the gram, show to the gram, woo, show to the gram, yeah, Travis Scott.
Hilarious, isn't it? Absolutely hilarious. I don't know. I would melt into the ground if anybody referred to me as that personally. But hey, we all have our different traits. So what's next on this? Francis Ngannou, TKO'd, knocked out, or TKO'd, technical knockout, I don't know, knocked out Stipe Miocic in their second heavyweight bout over the weekend, UFC 260. And yeah, man, what an impressive performance. What an impressive performance. I guess on my side of things, what I mentioned previously with Brendan Shaw, I think I made a video on it actually on my YouTube, so definitely check that out. I think it's called Is Brendan Shaw the worst MMA journalist of all, or analyst, something of all time? And I mentioned how interesting it was to hear loads of media and analysis and people who weren't giving Francis any chance because of how one-sided the first fight was, and because of how, you know, reckless and just, you know, shot heavy or knockout heavy or knockout dependent, right? Knockout dependent, whatever that term is, or how, you know, how basically the fact that Francis didn't really have a broad range of skills. It looked like all he had was a knockout power on his fist, and that was about it. And the fact that, you know, Stipe Miocic was able to display a full arsenal of, you know, mixed martial arts in terms of grappling, wrestling, boxing, you know, all that good stuff to kind of keep Francis at bay and really win that first fight pretty easily. And then after the fact, I think Francis then ended up losing against Derek Lewis on points, right? So there was a time when it was starting to look like, oh, maybe this hype of Francis Ngannou was a little bit premature. But it also made me think at the time that we've seen many accounts, especially as I mentioned it, that was the example of the Brian Ortega fight, when after he lost to Max Holloway and then he came back from that fight and he looked a completely different fighter because he went back to the drawing board, was able to kind of be honest with the faults that he has, some holes in his games, and just kind of improve in that short period of time. And what you've basically seen in my short time watching mixed martial arts, or watching UFC specifically, there is kind of some fighters who are able to kind of take a loss and, you know, take it on the chin, both publicly, in person and privately, and go back into the gym and basically work on their kind of errors and parts of their game that they're lacking in. And there's a certain segment of fighters who just refuse to acknowledge that they made a mistake and kind of tell themselves that the other person landed a lucky hit, they were injured, you know, the weight cut was too hard, whatever it may be, whatever excuse that they can think of in order not to take accountability, they'll find it. But there, you know, there are two camps, and it did seem to me that Francis maybe did land in the first camp where he was going to be honest in himself, in knowing that he has the potential to be a world champion, but he has to fill these gaps in his skills in order to get to that next level. Because what we've seen so far, you can probably get by with having your one thing if you want to get into the top 10, whether it's wrestling, jiu-jitsu, striking. But the moment you want to get into the top 5, or you want to get into the conversation of having a belt, you just have to be well-rounded. There's nothing else. You can't do anything else. The sport now has developed too far. There are too many great athletes involved now, great martial artists in general, for you just to kind of be okay with just being a jiu-jitsu guy. You're not going to get as far as you would have got maybe a few years ago. Look at just someone like a Damian Maia as a good example. You need to be a bit more well-rounded. Ben Askren suffered from that somewhat, especially towards the end of his career when he obviously the injuries caught up to him. And Francis Ngannou displayed that. that was probably one of the most masterful bits of performance we've ever seen from Francis, especially when you consider how quick he comes out of the gates, how he's always looking to take people's head off their shoulders. He came out from the first round patient, calm, waiting for his opportunity to strike. He demonstrated that he has kicks now. He went for a left, I think, a head kick with his left foot, I think sometime in the second round. He was hitting with calf kicks. Just imagine what those tree trunks of legs must have felt like on Stipe as he's getting cracked. He obviously showed he had a decent jab. He was setting up overhand rights and sneaky uppercuts. He was able to stuff a takedown from Stipe early on as well, which was incredibly scary. Stuff a takedown, take his back, and then unload a few hits as Stipe is kind of pinned up against the side of the cage. It was a very, 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 very great performance. It really, really demonstrated that this guy is definitely, especially, it's a shame that he's getting older and he's just doing, I think he's like 35 or something, Francis Ngannou. If this would have happened maybe a couple of more years prior, he could have had a very, very long stint as a world champion. At that weight class. It's just you don't really see anybody beating him, especially with the size difference, especially just with the power difference, and the fact that his wrestling, his grappling and jiu-jitsu is only going to improve as time goes by. It's just a bit scary to see how much he can evolve and get better from this point. It really was a masterful performance, man. Everything about it just made me happy to see. He really deserved it as a fighter, I think, all things considered. I think there's some pictures here as well showing exactly how it going down. You're seeing Francis jabbing opponents. Steve Miocic's face is just crumbling there under the pressure. I think this might have been the left that actually ended up flatlining Stipe, which probably was an error in his regard. I think he'd probably go back to drawing board and be a little bit gutted. I think he landed a right cross or something that stunned Ngannou a bit. Then Stipe got too excited and started to rush in. And as he rushed in, Ngannou hit him with a short. I think it was like a check hook even. He didn't even wind up that much. And just that one hook connected in just the right spot, and it completely flatlined Stipe. He was already kind of dizzy from that moment onwards. I think this is where the epic picture comes from of him kind of buckling under the weight and kind of bending backwards, and then of course Francis landed a vicious hammer strike right at the end there to just finally seal the deal. But honestly, what an incredibly impressive performance, man. No surprise really. Again, like I said, I think we should kind of get out of this idea that, especially at this level, when it gets to championship level fights, it's very unlikely someone's going to get to the to the peak of the mountain, discover that they're kind of lacking in some certain skills, and then not go back to the drawing board and make the necessary changes in order to get them that belt, because they also know how much rides on that belt, how different your life can change, right? We've seen with Francis, he won the belt, and as soon as he won it, I've seen him get interviewed on podcasts. He's on ESPN. He's getting, the coverage of him media wise has been incredible. Of course, his English has improved too, so that's kind of helping him, be able to kind of get on a few more platforms. But it completely changes your profile. I think the belt in the UFC is similar to like a Grammy, right? For musicians, they always complain about it, because they know the value that it brings monetarily, branding wise, and just perception wise, right? It just changes the conversation around you and your legacy instantly. The kind of lackluster performance against Stipe, instantly the lackluster performance against Derek Lewis, completely forgotten, because he's won the belt now, right? And he's got a platform to kind of build upon. He's shown us his skill set. He's developed as an all-round fighter. But naturally, the most important thing is that he won in devastating fashion. And with the belt, that's what changes the entire conversation. I'm sure it changes the prices that he commands in terms of fighting people. It puts him in a very strong position in terms of deciding who he goes after next. It validates the approach that his coaches did and kind of, solidifies their position. It really, really changes the narrative completely around him and his legacy, and what it kind of will, and what kind of it all accounts for when everything ends and he decides to hang up his gloves. But like I said, man, masterful performance. I wasn't too surprised. I generally did think if he was able to make the adjustments and improve his skill sets and kind of go and try to address some of his pain points, especially in terms of preventing takedowns, he had the ability to knock anybody out on their feet. So if you're convinced that you were going to win against Francis Ngannou by taking him down, now you have another situation to deal with. You have a whole other issue that you have to kind of wrangle with. How do you prevent this guy from knocking your head off your shoulders, but how do you also achieve your intention of getting him down, taking him down on a single or double leg? Because it's not that easy. Stipe is a big dude, right? And he looked tiny against Francis there. He had like what 30 pounds on him or something. I know Stipe leaned out a bit because of he wanted to, you know, aid himself in terms of movement, whatever it may be. But Ngannou still just looks massive. He just looks like an absolute beast. So to think that someone like a John Jones can put on muscle in order to fight someone like a Francis, and it makes sense, and people actually give him a chance, it does. I think it does show a respect for John Jones' skill set. I think that's a good thing. People really greatly appreciate and acknowledge just how great and kind of, you know, GOAT level John Jones is in terms of what he can do in the octagon. But from what we've seen so far, especially what we saw of Israel and Jan Blachowicz, how you pronounce his name, my bad. We did see sometimes size does matter. It really does, especially when the size difference is that great. It just does matter, especially when you're fighting against somebody who can wrestle, who can grapple. It's going to make a huge difference. So if anybody thought that John Jones putting on 30 pounds of muscle was going to make him more likely to knock out Francis Ngannou, this has definitely put a spanner in the works, because what we saw was somebody that has the size, has the power differential, but also has addressed these weak points. That's a very scary proposition for everybody involved in the heavyweight division. A very, very scary proposition. Moving on from that one, what else do we have here? Oh yeah, of course, with Tyron Woodley, felt sorry for him as well. That was a bloody awful way to go out, but awful way to go out in one sense, but also he must be okay with it in some regards, right? The fact that he did kind of step out on the front foot, he did kind of go for it straight away for the opening bell. He didn't wait. He didn't stand on the outside like he always does, aiming to counter. He kind of went on the front foot. He landed a couple big heavy shots on Vicente Luque. He rode it out, shook it off, and was able to kind of finish the job. But he did show enough that I think he probably shouldn't be. He probably isn't going to get kept on, because there's not really many people. I don't know, should he be kept on in the UFC? Probably should, innit, in terms of what he can still do in the octagon. I still think he can still beat a large majority of people in his division, maybe not top 10, maybe top 20. But he's shown enough that he maybe recognizes that he can't be the same guy he was before. He can't just be waiting on the outside, hoping things open up for him to counter onto. He needs to kind of step out on the front foot. Sugar Sean O'Malley, that was a great knockout as well. Bit cocky in the first round. He kind of purposely wanted to knock him out. Was it walk-off style, right? That didn't go his way, and then he sort of purposely was toying and teasing with the guy in the second round, and eventually got the knockout that he wanted, and then kind of finished the job. And he's another one too I want to see kind of rack up a couple of W's and hopefully go for the title again in his weight class. But yeah, a great card overall. Again, good to see Francis get the win in general. I'm happy for the guy, and hopefully he's able to kind of build on that legacy going forward. What else do we have here? Oh, we have this pretty distressing video. This is courtesy of Asian Dawn 4. It says, warning, violence and blood. A person violently beats up punches an Asian male in the head repeatedly in the Manhattan-bound train, chokes him afterwards until he's unconscious. Be on the lookout for this person. So when this video first went viral, no one really had any sort of real knowledge of the situation. Allegedly, the person that's getting beaten up said the N-word to the black gentleman that's obviously doing the pummeling, and that kind of justified it in some people's eyes. Then it was a whole Asian hate thing, because allegedly people thought the guy was Asian. Then it got revealed he might have been Hispanic. But either way, the crux of the situation, I think the lesson to be learned from this in general, similar to the lesson that should be learned from the video clip of that kid in the, bar toilet area somewhere, picking on a couple of MMA guys, and then both of them getting absolutely smashed, one of them having their orbital bone completely shattered. The fact of the matter is, we should be in a position or situation in life, especially with MMA, especially just how the world is at the moment, and places, and how tense people feel for some regard, right, in terms of their futures and politics and the world, whatever it may be. Everyone's kind of a bit tense at the moment. Maybe it's just a virus, whatever, something's going on in the atmosphere out there. We should be in a position, or we should be in a place where we should maybe discourage everybody, most people, from getting into any sort of physical altercation with strangers, because people are very highly strung. It seems like people are willing and able to turn and flip and go crazy at a moment's notice. And especially with the advent and the popularity of stuff like the UFC, it just makes no sense why people would want to annoy somebody to the point where they'd want to get into a physical altercation, or just involve themselves in anything that would involve a confrontation in the first place. The first rule of any sort of thing should be for you just to walk away. You have no idea what that person's like. You have no idea what they've been through. You have no idea what they're capable of. So to constantly put yourself in harm's way just because somebody said something to you don't like, or they stepped on your trainer, or they made a weird look towards you, whatever it may be, it just isn't worth it nowadays. The damage and violence and the heartache that exists out there with people. You had that story with that Uber driver that unfortunately passed away due to a couple of kids carjacking him in broad daylight. People are just recklessly losing their lives in senseless ways. The last thing you need to do is to kind of antagonize the situations and get involved in anything that's going to lead to what it's going to lead to. Now again, we don't know the backstory. It could be that the fact that the black kid was completely in the wrong, but in general, this level of kind of savagery is always going to occur when it comes to a fight, because it just is what it is. It's a violent altercation. There are no rules to this thing. This is not in the ring. We're not in a professional environment. You don't know what everyone's kind of choke point is, or where they kind of feel like enough is enough. Everyone's got their limit. So to kind of prevent all of that, just keep your hands to yourself, keep your opinions to yourself, and just keep on moving, because people out there are legit crazy. So here's a clip here I'm going to play. Of course, as it says here, warning for violence and blood. So if you don't want to see that, make sure you pause or you skip forward a couple of minutes. He's getting smashed, bloody hell. Then he gets choked out.
He's sweet. What the?
That's gonna hurt in the morning. It reminds me of that. Is it John Jones versus, who was it against? Was it Lyoto Machida, where he just sort of choked him out, and then as he went unconscious, just let go and dropped him on the floor? That isn't gonna hurt. That is definitely gonna hurt in the morning. And look at these responses, right? Some of these responses that kind of again illustrates people's naivete when it comes to these sort of situations. Using the N-word is wrong, this person says, but to say it's an excuse for any type of physical violence as a response is insane. That was sadistic level of violence, no matter the reason. Guy needs to be locked up. He's in danger to the public, of course, but these people exist. This is what I mean. I love to kind of exist and to kind of maneuver in the world as is, as opposed to the world that I would like it to be, right? Utopias for the most part don't exist. They only exist in sort of your own world, in your own head. Maybe you can create your own utopia to some extent, but in general, for you to expect everybody to kind of abide and to kind of interact with the world the way that you want them to is naive in the extreme. And also, like I said, you have no idea the amount of savagery and violence that people are capable of, because you have no idea who they are. So in order to kind of prevent those things from happening, just don't interact with people like this. If they do turn up, if they do kind of decide to instigate an argument, walk away. Make it known you want no trouble. Do whatever it may be to de-escalate the situation, but getting yourself involved and getting yourself in these sort of situations in the first place by using those words, even if people think the violence was over the top, the fact that this allegedly, we don't know what the term was, what actually happened, because again, because all these clips always annoy me because they always start from the point of violence, or they start from the point of the aggressor. We never actually see what actually made that person snap, and everyone's got their different snap point, like I mentioned prior. But to avoid it, just don't maybe drop the N-bomb in it. Just like keep your N-bombs to yourself, or keep them to your group chats, or to your circle of friends. Just don't do it to some random dude on a train who you have no idea what it's about. It just doesn't make any sense. It continues here. It makes me angry how no one intervenes. If I was on that train, things would have gone differently. No, they wouldn't have though. This is the thing, Daniel Povier. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have. This is another illustration of how it is in the actual real world. In the real world, people actually don't intervene when people are. I think there's a video recently now that just went viral of some old grandma outside of a hotel lobby or something, and she gets assaulted and kicked in the head by a big dude, but there's a security guard in the doorway of that hotel. He doesn't come out or intervene. He doesn't even alert or make it known his presence there. He doesn't say anything. Now, don't get me wrong, he's employed by the hotel, so maybe he shouldn't be out on the street trying to protect an old lady, but you would assume there'd be some level of responsibility or, you know, kind of decency or humanity that you might be like, hey, relax, man, chill out, and just make his presence known just so he can stop the savagery. He doesn't get involved whatsoever, and most people don't. Most people just watch. Most people just continue on. Most people just kind of pretend like it's not happening just so they don't get involved. That's what most people end up doing. So imagine living in a world where most people aren't going to intervene on your behalf, and then clearly going out there trying to antagonize people, start arguments, and then hoping somebody doesn't get violent with you, but when they do get violent, you want to then determine how violent they are and stop them from doing certain things. There are no rules. You're in the streets. There really are no rules. It continues here. You know what pisses me off? How the left make such a big deal about the skin color, the shooter, the Atlanta shootings. Yet in the weeks since the shooting, I've seen dozens of videos of Asians being assaulted by blacks, and all those same leftists are nowhere to be seen. Great, good point. It was what really pisses me off is that not a single person that trained tried to help him, and they did this feebly tell the guy to stop a few times. Just about every video I've seen assaults in big cities is just like this, and this is the very, very, very true. So if all these people are going out there protesting about for certain things happening, where there are things happening in your actual community that you can kind of stop and you can kind of intervene in, you don't get involved. But then from the comfort of your own home, when you're behind your keyboard, you want to hashtag out things, you want to bring out this fake support with people, when in general, in day-to-day lives, no one does anything. No one does anything. So that's why I said, in general, people should just keep their hands and their insults to themselves, because you really have no idea what people are capable of and what level of savagery that they're willing to dish out at the slightest bit of disrespect. Now, again, do I advocate? Do I condone? Do I think it's a good thing that this guy went around and beat the living daylights out of this guy and choked him unconscious? Of course not, right? This guy could be suffering from permanent brain damage, right? That is not a nice thing to see. But again, don't involve yourself with certain people. Just keep yourself to yourself. Mind your business. People don't do that enough these days. They don't mind their business enough, and they get involved in these altercations that are, you know, avoidable to some extent, and then they cry foul when they go really, really bad, right? When the outcome doesn't turn out to their favor. Unfortunately, you can't predict how someone's going to react to you. So the only thing you can do is how you react to the world itself, in my opinion. Again, what do I know? So, what else do we have here before we end? Don't want to keep you for too long here. Yeah, I think that might be it for now. Yeah, let's do it from there. End on that nice, great uplifting note for now. That has been the AgostinhoZinga Show episode number, what's that, 442? Right, as per usual. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you've been checking out the show via YouTube, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, leave me a comment down below. If you're watching or listening via the podcast, please leave me a 5-star review. That'll help people to get to know the shows out there and available. And of course, if you want to join the Patreon, you're more than welcome to at patreon.com/Agostinho, patreon.com/AGOSTINHO. For as little as $1 per month, you get access to my archive as well as 2 bonus episodes only for Patreon subscribers. So make sure you jump on there and get involved. But until then, take care, be safe, peace.